Thank you so much for welcoming me. I feel very privileged and humbled to have been asked to speak today, both as a gay man and as chairman of the Elton John AIDS Foundation. It's now 30 years since 8 young gay men in New York staggered into hospitals with symptoms their doctors didn't understand. These ill young people were appearing all over the United States and soon all over the world. The alarm bells about the AIDS crisis had begun to ring. Since then, 30 million people have died from the disease. That's the equivalent of every single person in my home country of Canada being killed. Unbelievable. We'll never be able to list the names of all the great artists and great thinkers and great mums and great dads that we have lost. We all have our own personal grief, and we all have our own chamber of heart full of ghosts. But if it wasn't for the extraordinary people in this room and the work that you do every day, there would be millions more lives lost. Yet now, after 30 years, we're facing a new danger. The alarm bell that began to ring in the hospitals of New York for all those years ago is for too many people being put on snooze. There's a new generation who have never known a world without AIDS, and it can too easily become part of the background noise, something that we accept as inevitable. I'm telling you right now, it's not inevitable. Nobody has to die this way. If we step up your work, the young people in this room can live to see a world without AIDS. I remember that feeling. I remember it very well. I'm going back to 1981. It was in Canada, and I was a young man trying to come to terms with my sexuality. And I'd hear on the news and on the TV that a gay plague was sweeping the world, and I'd hear Christian fundamentalist preachers saying that this was just justice being handed down for perversion. It was like every hateful claim about gay people was being given an approving stamp. It drove me further and further back into fear and further back into the closet. The first reaction of many people was to blame the victims, and many gay people wrongly, silently blamed themselves. An incredible generation of gay activists and millions of good, decent, straight people who supported them challenged that. Don referred to that in his speech. They picketed the bigots, and they got help to the vulnerable, and they turned so much of that shame into love. Their slogan was "Silence equals death." Their example in the face of so much grief inspired America and reminded the world that people living with AIDS were not dehumanized perverts, but human beings with dignity and dreams. But the stain of shame has not been entirely washed away. I'm convinced the reason why lots of young gay men are engaged in risky sexual behavior again is because they're still being subjected to so much bigotry and rejection, and it accumulates in their hearts, and they don't value their life or their health. It's still going on. Proposition 8, the delays in repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, these all marginalize gay men and women across this country. It's wrong. If you've been told for so long that you're worthless, is it any surprise if you act like it and risk your life with unsafe sex? I'm extremely lucky. I had the privilege in my life of a loving family and finding a loving partner. But if I hadn't been so lucky, if I hadn't been trapped in that initial fear, would I have been self-destructive? It's something each of us in this room should ask ourselves. At the core of the fight against AIDS is the fight against homophobia. They are one and the same. This risky behavior is driven by bigotry, and it's leading us into frightening places. In many American cities, as many as 1 out of every 5 gay and bisexual men are HIV positive, and half of those who are HIV positive have no awareness that they have the disease. The HIV prevalence in gay America rivals that of many of the hardest hit regions in the world. And even worse, rates of new infections amongst gay and bisexual men are on the rise, the only risk group for which this is the case. This has to stop. The extraordinary energy and spirit that drove the first waves of AIDS activism has ebbed away. Gay people as a community have allowed this to happen, and we need to engage in some loving self-criticism and reflection. The great Martin Luther King once said, "We begin to die the moment we are silent about the things that matter." For gay people, this is no longer a metaphor. If we fall silent about AIDS, If we allow it to become a second-order issue, many of us will have to needlessly live with the disease, and some will die before our time. But this analysis does not only apply to gay people. Today you see the worst HIV increases amongst people who are made to feel the most shame by society: young gay people, prisoners, injection drug users, and victims of racism amongst African Americans and Latino communities. The answer to shame is love. If we want to hear that alarm clock telling them that they are in danger of the HIV virus, I believe we have to deal with the anger and abuse that can make people deaf and self-destructive in the first place. That's what I see in the best community projects, and many of them are represented in this room here today, and I just want to very quickly recognize their amazing work. The Elton John AIDS Foundation has been very proud to partner with 2 Chicago companies as part of the Greater Than AIDS awareness campaign in Black and gay communities. Walgreens, the largest drugstore and pharmacy chain in America, has done something amazing. You're going to clap more when I give you the details. They've done something amazing at more than 450 Walgreens stores across the country. They've set up HIV centers there where anyone can get rapid oral HIV testing, one-on-one medication counseling and other support services, and confidential care under the umbrella of the National Greater Than AIDS campaign. This is amazing. You can walk into a drugstore and get an AIDS test. It's so easy. But they're not alone. Johnson Publishing and Ebony Magazine has partnered with the Greater Than AIDS Walgreens and EJF to produce a Be Greater Than AIDS information guide in 1.6 million magazines, which has reached 11 million people so far. 1 million additional copies of the guide were produced and distributed free of charge in select Walgreens stores, as well as by AIDS service organizations and other community groups. So many more collaborations like these are needed to advance our community's fight against AIDS and to fight stigma. Chicago should be so proud that 2 of its most prominent corporations are playing a national role in fighting AIDS. Let's give them a big round of applause. But there's so much more we need to do, and we can see the road ahead. We have 3 major challenges that we're facing. The first challenge is awareness and testing. Too many of us don't know our HIV status. Given how many gay people carry the virus, we're not getting tested nearly enough. This has a result that is simple and awful. Many HIV-positive gay men and bisexual men are unknowingly spreading the disease to others. We cannot allow this to continue. That's why in the last year alone, the Elton John AIDS Foundation has invested over $1 million in innovative programs. All over the country, they reach out to people at the greatest risk with a mixed menu of HIV/AIDS awareness, health empowerment, testing, counseling, and treatment services. We support statewide testing tours organized by the Black AIDS Institute as part of the Greater Than AIDS campaign. We support Project First at Bailey House in Harlem. We support the FACT program in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and the list goes on, from Miami to Los Angeles to Kansas to the doorstep of this convention here in Chicago. The second challenge is to deal with and end another kind of shame. One reason why young gay men don't get tested is because they're terrified, not just of the disease, but of the stigma and the shame attached to being HIV positive. So just as we need to challenge racism and homophobia, we need to challenge bigotry against HIV positive people. That's why over the past year, the Foundation has invested nearly $2 million in programs addressing the twin problems of stigma and homophobia across the US, Latin America, and the Caribbean. But Abraham Lincoln said, "You can't permanently do for other people what they won't do for themselves." Our most important mission is to empower communities to stand up for themselves and demand what they deserve as a right, not as an act of charity. That's why in partnership with the Kaiser Family Foundation and the Black AIDS Institute, we are developing Greater Than AIDS Pride. It's a national campaign targeted specifically to get gay people fighting for our rights again. It's already reaching hundreds of thousands of people with messages encouraging them to be informed, to act with respect for others, to speak openly, use condoms, get tested for HIV, and become involved in their communities. Looking across this room, there are few communities as vibrant as the gay community. We did this before, we can do it again. The third greatest challenge we face stems from the global economic downturn. The extraordinary light of science is finally giving us a roadmap to end the AIDS epidemic. Yet at this very moment, governments are threatening to cut back their funding. They seem to believe this will save money, but they're wrong. It's false economy. Earlier this year, the National Institutes of Health released an exciting, groundbreaking study demonstrating conclusively that people living with HIV who receive effective antiretroviral treatments are 96% less likely to pass the disease on to their sexual partners. 96%. That is an amazing result. That is real progress in the fight against this disease. This will save a fortune. HIV prevention and research are investments that pay for themselves. Cutting back on them saves nothing and costs lives. Yet today, over 9,000 HIV-positive people who can't afford health insurance and are on state waiting lists to receive discounted antiretroviral medications through the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. The state of Florida, which has the largest AIDS Drug Assistance Program waiting list in the country, is considering policy changes that would eliminate thousands from the program in order to cut costs. The people of Florida are good people. They are better than this appalling decision by their politicians. We need to appeal to their decency and compassion to reverse that decision. That's why we're working with Senator Bill Nelson, the senior senator from the state of Florida, and we've conducted a national petition drive on this issue as well. Does anybody in Florida really believe people living with AIDS should be the ones to pay for a crisis caused by Wall Street bankers? I say no. We have to fight this. If Florida succeeds in this terrible proposal, other states are expected to follow. The state of Illinois has already slashed financial eligibility for the AIDS Drug Assistance Program and placed a monthly cap of $2,000 on expenditures. Fortunately, patients who are already in the program who exceed new financial eligibility requirements have been grandfathered in and will continue to receive medical assistance. But hundreds of new low-income HIV patients will be out of luck and out of health. God knows sometimes in this work we can all become disheartened and depressed. I'm sure it's happened to all of us from time to time. But when it does, I'd like you to remember something that my partner Elton recently wrote about in the Huffington Post. On June the 28th, 1969, the police famously raided the Stonewall Inn and beat up the people there just for being gay. Imagine if you'd stood in the Stonewall Inn that night and said, 42 years from now, on these streets, they'll be celebrating the introduction of gay marriage, there'll be openly gay cops, openly gay politicians, and lawyers kissing on streets across the city, and the people who think you are sick will be the ones regarded as freaks. It would have seemed like the most absurd science fiction, but it happened. It happened in the lifetime of many of the people who were there in the Stonewall Inn that night. They lived to see it. So when I tell you today that I expect my son Zachary to live to see a world without AIDS, it may sound impossible at first glance, but the impossible happens if enough people unite and organize and use the power of science and compassion to make it so. As I look around this room, I know there is the genius and the grit here to do this. Yes, I know that if we are determined, we can make the next 30 years of the next 30 years of the AIDS virus its last. Thank you.